Welcome back, Chappelle. All right. So we left off in class today. I don't want to try and chew up too much of your time, but I will say one thing real fast. You should definitely already be started on your study guide if you're preparing for your test, right? Hold on, refocus. There it goes. All right, so you should definitely be already started studying for your test, right? For A and D, you have it on Friday. For F, you have it on Monday. Just make sure you're getting ready. Make sure you're kind of just starting to get relaxed with the material and stuff like that. So, but let's get after it, all right? We left off in all of our classes talking about Philip II and the fact that he conquered the entire Greek state following the Peloponnesian War and was a professional at using the phalanx and had a massive military, right? So we talked about his eye and what happened there and what he saw, quote unquote. Now, so Philip, though, is not all about just Philip II of Macedonia, is not all about just taking over things at the cost of his soldiers' lives, right? He would actually use multiple different strategies. He utilized the strategies of the Persians and the Assyrians and the Spartans and the Athenians. He was a great leader, right? And he was used threats. When he threatened Sparta, he was like, look, surrender or we'll take you over. Sparta was like, look, we'd rather fight with you than against you, and they just turn over, right? He used diplomacy, which he actually made allies with smaller Greek city-states by agreeing to trade with them and giving them more of a cut in a deal. And then he also used bribes to take over larger city-states and actually to create big allies, okay? His main targets, though, was Athens and their little ally Thebes, right? And Thebes is located here, and Athens is located right there, all right? So now, big thing about it, though, before he gets started, Philip decides, you know what? I have probably the most amazing son that you probably ever laid your eyes upon, right? Philip hired Aristotle to be his son's teacher. His son's name was Alexander III, right? Is he great yet? No, he hasn't done anything yet. But Philip knew that Alexander was destined for great things. There's actually stories that talk about Alexander and how Philip thought that, son, Macedonia is just too small for you. Go out and conquer many a kingdom, right? So actually one of the most famous ones, before he turns 18, when he's being tutored by Aristotle, according to the Greek historian Plutarch, one of the most famous story is the taming of Alexander's horse, Bucephalus, right? So this right here is Alexander's horse, okay? So his name was Bucephalus, the large black steed that apparently had a very big white star on his forehead, right? So according to the story, now what ended up happening, and I actually shout out to Mr. Waterson because he actually told me about this story. So big thing though that shows the esteem, the belief that Philip thought that he was going to go off and conquer the world and do amazing things. It's because he watched his son tame a horse that was untamable, right? According to the story, Philip was offered to buy a horse named, this horse, Bucephalus, and no one could tame Bucephalus. He would throw people off his back. He would constantly be bucking. You couldn't get close to him. He would kill people. And then he was offered to buy an untamable horse for the modern day value of 17 talents or $182,000, right? So that's like 2 Ferraris, all right? So and Philip's like, no, we don't want that. But Alexander was like, no, father, I'm 13. It's time for me to have my own horse. I love that horse. He's huge. If I can tame that horse, we get it, all right? And the dealer makes the arrangement with him, and Alexander walks up to Bucephalus, who is freaking out. He speaks calmly to it. He's like, hey, talks to it, pets it, turns the horse towards the sun, because it turns out the entire time Bucephalus was just afraid of his own shadow, right? So Alexander turns him towards the sun so he's not seeing his shadow anymore, brushes his coat, and tames the horse. And Philip was so astonished by it, he was like, Macedonia, my son is too small for you, right? So when Alexander turns 18, years after Bucephalus has been tamed and he's been with his father through many a battle, he helps his father defeat the leftover Delian League and Thebes. Athens is going to surrender to them out of fear because they just saw their ally get smacked around, right? So going forward, though, Philip then turns his eyes to Persia, right? He was like, they are weak right now. They have not been the same since they tried to invade us. They are going to be an easy target. Let's get after those guys. And he wanted Alexander to be at his side with him. And he tells his son this. He's like, we're going to go over there and we're going to destroy that empire and take it for ourselves. Which at the time, the known world was basically Greece, Persia, Fertile Crescent, and Egypt. And they wanted it all, right? But what ended up happening at Philip's daughter's wedding, Philip is stabbed to death by one of his bodyguards, right? There's an entire backstory to it and stuff like that. It's very, very dicey. And the bodyguard then tries to run away, trips on a vine, and ends up getting stabbed by the rest of the bodyguards, right? His name was, oh man, what was his name? It's like Picenius, all right? So Picenius is the bodyguard's name. Now, unfortunately, Philip is dead, all right? But everyone knows that Alexander is his favorite child, right? Now, even though he's not the right age to be a leader because he has brothers that are older than him, here's the thing, though. Philip had 7 wives, all right? So one of those wives is named Olympias, right? That is Alexander's mother, apparently, that Philip saw cheating on him, all right? But then she outmaneuvers the other wives and places Alexander on the throne, right? So Alexander becomes king of all of Greece and the Macedonian Empire. Now, Alexander is going to successfully, for 2 years, hold on to all of Greece, but when he turned 20, he recruited a huge army of enough men and ships to cross the Aegean Sea and attempt to conquer Persia and an empire that stretches from India all the way to Egypt, right? He actually set his eyes on Egypt first, right? There's a very famous story about Alexander the Great and how his army was almost defeated in Egypt, right? Because here's the thing. Why would it be so hard to invade Egypt? Geographically speaking, they're in the middle of a desert, right? So you have to start in the desert before you can invade Memphis, which was the capital of Egypt at the time, right? So, or Cairo, or Anis, or any of the larger cities inside of Egypt, right? So you have to start out in the desert. And according to the legend, his soldiers and him were out in the desert dying. They were dying of dehydration, right? And all of the soldiers, because they looked to Alexander with so much esteem, and they thought he was so amazing, and he was like, you smell even great, right? So apparently, they all went around to each other's canteens and poured the last little bit of water they had in the cup. And they handed that cup to Alexander, and they were like, sir, you need this. Drink this water. We will go without, right? And Alexander takes the cup, and he looks at it. This is while he's invading Egypt again. And then he pours it out in the desert. And he's like, you don't drink, I don't drink. And then his people were like, I'll die for you. And then they just run into Egypt and take it over, right? That's an old one of my history professors told me. I really hope it's true. All right, but they thought he was such a great leader, so they actually successfully take over Egypt, right? Now, here's the other thing, though, too. He's also just a smart military tactician because he realizes that Persia was just super, super weak from a lot of really weak rulers, right? So Persia went through a line of terrible rulers following Xerxes and a lot of infighting, right? So Alexander is going to battle his way through an empire that's already crumbling at the seams, which is amazing. So remember, for the honors kids, you'd know this. For the maybe for the my regular kids, you don't. But the Persians had a capital city called Persepolis. All right, and when he actually made it to Persepolis, he burnt the entire thing to the ground. Right, this is just like a statement of how aggressive he thought it was that we should destroy these people and take their lands because they tried to take ours from us. Right. Alexander apparently, according to the legend, never lost a battle, not even once. Even when he actually fought against soldiers mounted on the backs of elephants when he got to India, right? He was fighting against war elephants and was not even deterred, right? Bucephalus charged in with him, and they apparently were startled one of the elephants, threw off the driver, and then the elephant just went about its business. So he told all of his military men, just aim for the driver, right? And so they started shooting the man on top of the elephant instead of trying to attack the elephant directly, right? So he never once lost a battle. Not once. He's like some crazy number in O. Now, he then apparently settles down after conquering the entire Persian Empire and apparently was distraught because there were no more lands to conquer. Now, of course, this is according to the movie Die Hard and the evil villain Hans, but we're not going to get into that right now. So, before setting out again, though, Alexander unexpectedly falls ill to a very sudden fever, right? Possibly given to him by one of his 3 wives, right? Alexander had multiple wives as well. One of them's named Phyllis. All right, so now, anyway, he dies from a sudden fever, and he ends up telling in his last breaths, they ask him, they're like, Alexander, who do we give the empire to? And he says, leave it to the best, bleh, and then he just dies. And so his 3 lead generals get to take it over. Well, what happens when 3 strong people are supposed to be in charge of something? They start fighting with each other. So over the next 300 years, the empire falls apart due to men battling for control, right? But the crazy thing about it is he ushered in a new era. So when he dies, the classical period ends. And so begins the 300 years of prosperity, known as the Hellenistic Age, right? Which is a blend of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian cultures. It's a golden age. And I know somewhere right now, there's a little kid freaking out right now. It's like Michelle, and she's like, cultural diffusion! Exactly. Underneath this somewhere, we'll jot down cultural diffusion because it makes empires great, right? The spread of cultural traits makes things great. It also spreads disease, but we're not going to get into that right now. So, Alexander also, according to the legend, was such a promising person, they learned from the Egyptians that there is one food that would never go bad. Honey. And I don't know if you know that, but honey will actually never spoil, ever. It'll just like separate, it'll turn into sugar and like a little bit of liquid base. All you gotta do is heat it up, stir it up though. Bang, becomes honey again, just like it was when it was originally made by the bees. Now, so they actually buried Alexander in a vat of honey, all right? According to legend, anyway. Now, guess where Alexander's body is? We don't know. All right, so we have no clue where it is. Alexander's remains are unclaimed, and we have no idea where it is, right? So now, but what he does during this golden age, he starts establishing multiple different cities, and he starts building a bunch of different libraries and different like intelligence centers. He starts naming a lot of them after himself too. Alexandria, and then there was another Alexandria, and then there was an Alexandretta, and then like so. Alexander likes Alexander, it's very apparent. Now, anyway, but the Golden Age is a very, very promising place. And Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt, was its capital, right, of this big Hellenistic empire. 300 years of new empires that boast spices from Arabia, marble from Greece, and their capital city is home to over 1 million people, which back during this time period was an insane amount. Now, just to show you the spread of cultural traits, during Hellenistic Egypt, you've got something happening over here. What are these? Good job. They're mummies, all right? Very, very good. These are the sarcophagus that mummies are usually buried in. But what's the issue here? That guy's not Egyptian. That dude is Greek, because look at his skin. It's super fair. So here's the thing. Greeks were living in Alexandria, Egypt during this Hellenistic period, as you can see here, and they picked up the process of mummification from the Egyptians. So we actually have mummified Greeks that we have discovered in Egypt as well during this Hellenistic period. Women were also even revered during the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period didn't end until the Romans dealt the final death blow to their empire, and their last ruler was this woman, Cleopatra VII. All right, so I don't know if you've heard about Cleopatra, but there was Mark Antony, and apparently she was hanging out with Julius Caesar for a little while, and Julius Caesar wanted to bring her back to Rome, but the Romans were like, ah. All right, so now, women were revered and could become poets, philosophers, even rulers during the Hellenistic period, right? Now, of course, they didn't have the same rights as a man at the time, which is ridiculous and absolutely insane, but like it's the way, I'm reporting. I'm not saying it's a good thing. Now, also, though, during the Hellenistic period, people are going to begin to try and take attempts at mapping the solar system, right? They're like, oh, wait, no, the solar system is actually heliocentric, where the sun is in the middle, and the planets go around it. And then others are like, no, it's geocentric, where the Earth is in the center, and the planets go around it. Now, some of you are like, one of these is right, and one of these is wrong. And you are 100% correct, all right? You are 100% correct. But the fact that intellectual debate, is going on in an ancient empire shows intelligence. This very, very famous statue from the Hellenistic period, the Venus de Milo, is actually another amazing piece of artwork that is considered one of the most beautiful pieces in the world. I believe it's housed in the museum in London, the National Museum of London. Now, advances in medicine are going to jump forward. Hippocrates is going to bring about this thing called the Hippocratic Oath, where all doctors are required to help those who are sick, all right, without like risk of like cost or anything like that. For example, if you go into a hospital right now, every doctor has had to take the Hippocratic Oath, which says that if there is someone that is sick, they must help them, right? So Hippocrates created that in the Hellenistic period. And then, of course, like I said, there's the Venus de Milo. And then also Archimedes is going to be another famous figure from the Hellenistic period. And he's an inventor, and he developed all these amazing devices, right? The Archimedes screw is right down here. It's the very first well system. It would actually pull water up from a lower level and bring it to the surface, right, which is a genius theory. He also came up with theories on density, right, and water displacement. he actually, like, so the theories on density was like, oh, well, a more dense object will sink and a less dense object will float if it is less than the density of water. And then he also was like, oh, wait, so I kind of sink in this bathtub, and apparently he used to do these experiments in the bathtub, and according to legend, whenever he was in his bathtub one time, he figured out water displacement because he got in the bathtub and the water rose, and he realized that's how you could literally lift ships above a water line, right? And this water displaced and went outside of his bathtub, and apparently had a genius idea, and he jumped up and he screamed, "Eureka!" and starts running through the streets of Alexandria naked because he like had an intelligent idea. Now, also he came up with this thing called a heat ray, which never actually worked, but it's a genius principle. It's the idea of like just setting a ship on fire in the middle of a like ocean with a with a magnifying glass. And he came up with a bunch of math junk, like for example the diminishing returns theories, the idea of trying to find the area of a curve using diminishing returns and things like just a lot of math stuff. All right, so anyway, but that's it. So I guess I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. That's the last bit for this unit. Y'all need to go ahead and start speed studying and getting after it, and then your tests are coming up soon. But we're going to dedicate the entire class tomorrow to reviewing. All right, so we're going to get after it. You guys are going to do great. Can't wait to see you then. Y'all have a good one. Have a good night.